Good evening, everyone. It's Halloween night, and I hope you're having a good Halloween. It's a night where we celebrate the strange and macabre, the unique and the wonderful in their own strange way. And so I wanted to take this night as an opportunity to share my thoughts on the world. Now, it's entrenched in my own experience, starting about 7 years ago. I've written a script, so if notice that I'm reading from the right, that's because it's where I've written all my stuff down. And I apologise, but there's too much to keep in my head. When I was 28, I was trying to enter a career in research. I took an opportunity in a new town and I hoped for the best. My work lasted for 6 weeks, and during that time, leading up to leaving for the new town, I lost everything that was important to me. My parents were disrespectful to my partner at the time and spoke of them badly, so I fell out with them. And then my partner left me abruptly after an extreme love bombing, just ladling it on as high as possible. And that left me emotionally devastated, to put it bluntly. By the time that my 6 weeks of work had ended, I was alone, without family to speak to, or company, really, as it was in a new town, and I was left with only enough money to live at a local YMCA. In the YMCA, I was surrounded by violent criminals and drug dealers. I wish that wasn't an accurate description of my neighbours, but from what I observed, it was. In fact, some of them were outright some of them were rapists. During this time I was isolated. I was coping with my reality by creating delusions that life wasn't as bad as it was. I believed that love was still in my life, and that I was capable of lifting those around me to a more comfortable and contented way of life. I put myself to work giving advice, keeping them company and feeding them when they were hungry, which was often. But I had a deeper obsession beside the facile acts of care that I was performing. I would retreat to my flat, often to meditate on the nature of life, love and community, and the nature of the human race as a species, as a physical expression of our shared reality. During this whole stage of my life, I was experiencing a prodromal phase of psychosis. This involves a tendency to build narratives, and my obsessions with society and human rights had led me down a path of empathy and discovery, which, although often painful and lonely, did gift me soaring moments of beauty that were akin to religious experiences. Although I am not a man of any one religion, I related to religion through an empathic lens that viewed religions not as supernatural but as social constructs, aligned to guide the wayward and the young in a chaotic, nebulous existence that confuses the best of us. Written by ancient, emotional and intuitive geniuses, religious texts shone a blinding light of gorgeous, eye-watering poetry that astounded the masses of the time, resulting in reverence and love. With this mindset, the existence of whichever character within the text was a meaningless side point. Someone wrote that poetry and ultimately inspired millions, if not billions. Personally, I don't mind if Jesus was the thought child of an older man or woman who knew through hard-earned wisdom what would inspire the younger members of their tribe. If anything, that truth would be more impressive and inspiring than anything supernatural. Humans are astounding, Poetry is a force of nature that compounds through inspiration into magnificent physical expressions through human acts. When I found the beauty of ancient texts or teachings, it felt like meeting a god, but not in a metaphysical sense. It was like meeting an aged genius that sits near the end of time, free from anger, free from disappointment and pain. I am not too proud to admit that I have wept at the face of ancient genius, and I have grieved for the lost appreciation of that wisdom and kindness present in their teachings. Due to their bundling with outdated misogynistic and homophobic passages, and the atheistic, with me included, tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't like the supernatural aspects, so you throw the whole religion out. Religion, like all philosophy, is a conversation, and like all conversations, there are varying levels of truth within each perspective. So I had many questions. How do we maximise truth within our dialogues? How can we challenge the holiness of ancient texts to continue the conversation into a modern world and the space age beyond? How can we cultivate and incubate spiritual maturity to produce mystics scientifically? Mystics I will go on to describe as Buddhas later in this text. How do we embrace the Buddha, the Messiah, and the Prophet in a safe, logical and predictable manner? Together, I am sure we can raise the level of human maturity, lifting from the bottom while nurturing excellence, like any good teacher knows is right. With the right, results-oriented attitude towards our culture as a species, we can take each individual into consideration, and the sky would be the limit. Our life on Earth could be beautiful and punctuated with profound perspectives at a unique pace and direction for each person. We could have lives well lived as a standard. Now I have to define a few terms that I do not think are commonly used, as I may have come up with them. First, I want to talk about something that I call belief space. It's similar to philosophical position. This term basically refers to a person's position within a selection of possible opinions. I like to imagine belief space as a three-dimensional space where each person is represented by a dot. Somewhere within the space itself, imagine the political window, but with more axes. However, 3 dimensions is actually insufficient to represent a belief system in its entirety, and therefore we need another way to imagine a set of beliefs beyond 3 axes of variability. For those of you with a mathematical or scientific education, you may already be thinking, use a matrix. And I hear you shouting from the back. And that's very true. A matrix can represent an infinite number of dimensions numerically, but this is quite technical, and for the non-mathematicians within the audience, it may be difficult to understand. So I got to work thinking, how can I help people imagine what I am getting at when I say something like a point in belief space? So the most intuitive way that I could think of was a deck of cards. Each card can be tailor-made to represent a position on a given axis. For example, the more authoritarian among us may have a king of clubs in their deck, representing an attitude towards authority and a lenience towards police violence and imprisonment for non-violent offences. Someone who is focused more on reduction of recidivism or reoffending, and believes that justice involves the addressing of criminal mental health and well-being, might be represented by a king of hearts. Just to give examples, aces could represent passions or expertise, jacks could represent hobbies, and so on. Moving away from the traditional cards, one might have an ace of gardening, or a queen of the environment that represents a love for environmental protection. Each person's set of beliefs can theoretically be represented by a deck with as many cards as needed, but each deck represents a position within belief space, along a certain axis. So using this concept, I like to imagine the human race as a network of connected positions, not in Cartesian space or standard reality, or on top of a globe, but a network in belief space that has regions that shift in activity as the zeitgeist, the overarching culture of any given time, shifts throughout history. So from here, I want to consider the desire to shape the form of humanity in belief space to a desired outcome. I will start from the most obvious and aggressive examples and work towards more innocuous and hopefully virtuous examples. Social engineering is as old as society itself, and is, in essence, the positioning of a certain in-group, be that a nation or religion, to, within certain given parameters, a region of belief space. This can be achieved through indoctrination at a young age, imprisonment, or murder to eliminate unwanted perspectives. There are several archetypes which dictate the desired position within belief space in specific situations. First, there is the namesake of dictation, the dictator. Dictators use the threat of violence or imprisonment to induce lip service towards the desired position within belief space. Dictatorships result in an echo chamber where opposing perspectives from that of the dictator are crushed and the population becomes surrounded by confirmation of the status quo, reinforcing the philosophy of the state, making disagreement almost impossible, let alone a resistance. This type of society and social engineering was well explored in the book 1984, in which language is curtailed to limit expression and historic documents are changed regularly to represent the current narrative of the state. There is no truth beyond the party line. There is only the present moment and what Big Brother says is true in that given moment. Next, there are dictator-adjacent archetypes, such as a king, the emperor, the pharaoh, and the Tsar, effectively represented by any large-scale tribal leader. Similar to the dictator, the king enforces a culture of reverence, often putting themselves at the head of the local religion, or claiming to be divinely chosen to lead by right of birth. Monarchy does not choose leadership through merit, but by chance of birth, and as such the culture devolves into a cult of worship towards the royal bloodline. Ancient royal families kept slave economies alive by upholding caste systems where the opinions of slaves did not matter, and the ruling castes were kept in line through cultural indoctrination, the threat of social exclusion, or worse. Due to having several contradictions with science, kingdoms are rare in the modern world, but some still exist. Although their ability to enforce their zeitgeist on the people they rule over is limited, modern kingdoms rely on their influence over statesmen, taking advantage of regular meetings with their country's head of state, and, in capitalist society, ally themselves with the ultra-wealthy and capitalist class to enforce a culture in society that benefits their shared interests. This normally includes being a proponent of a low tax rate for the wealthy and a scoffing disbelief towards rival economic models that would tax them more, represented throughout the media. The leveraging of media and control over the topics taught in school engineers the population into a docile and unthreatening position, most of which don't believe a better life for workers is possible despite their current conditions being so very inadequate. Next, we have religious leaders, which are a varied group both in terms of power and desired outcome in social engineering. Throughout history, religions have clashed many times, killing worshippers of opposing religions, and they have also killed unbelievers and those they labelled as witches to reinforce a religious population. However, some religious leaders are benign, such as most modern Protestants, some Jewish and Muslim churches in the West. Religions mostly focus on maintenance of core values and avoiding apostasy within their ranks. This gives religious leaders a lot of power, as properly formed dogma leads the religious to listening to the leader's lectures regularly. This allows religious leaders to reinforce their preferred focuses within their flock. This can sometimes involve something called the prosperity gospel, where churchgoers are pressured into giving up their money to support the church and particularly their vicar. As it is also possible that religious leaders can reinforce their own bigotry through aggressive homophobia, which has been present throughout historic Christianity and Islam. Small religions with very few adherents and a strong central figure which dominates the other members of the religion are called cults. Cults often use psychedelics or other psychoactive compounds to make their followers more suggestible and therefore easier to control. Cult leaders reinforce the belief that they are special and worthy of worship above all other beliefs, to keep the flock loyal. They then use their power to control almost all aspects of the cult followers' lives, such as what work they do and which romantic relationships they are permitted to have. Relationships are often shuffled to cause emotional turmoil within the group, which keeps individuals isolated to the extent that it benefits the cult leader through dependence on them. This is not an exhaustive list of archetypes that seek to influence the cultural zeitgeist, but without becoming tedious, this covers the majority of those with the greatest ability to sculpt minds to their will. You can think of politicians or positions of authority such as judges, police officers, and unelected officials in a similar way, but the scope of their influence is usually minor compared to someone like a pope or a dictator like Vladimir Putin, who hold a monopoly on piety within a specific religion or one of violence in an authoritarian state. So, where is the hope? It seems that everybody is sculpting the belief space of society into one that suits them or is wholly tailored to their image. Luckily, we have positive archetypes that influence the minds of those they interact with in a generally positive manner. Teachers who ally themselves to the truth and do not speak of their own opinions out of pocket enrich the lives of their students by informing them of scientific, mathematical, or historical factual reality. Counsellors and leaders within youth organisations like the Cadets equip young people with beneficial tools that can aid them throughout their lives. Really, education and guidance on navigating internal emotional lives is some of the objectively most positive influence a single person can provide to society. Now here is the kicker. People with extremely selfless motives who are exceptional communicators do exist, and for a lack of a better word, I prefer to call them Buddhas, rather than mystics or messiahs or whatever else people might call exceptional spiritual leaders. This is because the humble Buddha sounds a lot more attainable and less mythological or supernatural than someone claiming to be the single chosen leader with an ear to God, of which they have no evidence. Buddhas are typically minimal in personal desire, which is a rabbit hole within itself to chase no desire. They can actively accept their lives at any standing or stage with an ability to retreat to a peaceful place of acceptance during any time of turmoil. Finally, and most importantly, Buddhas are wise, as in they are acutely aware of the nature of their own existence, holding no will to struggle with the universe to make things not as they are. To a Buddha, life is a roller coaster free of blame, doubt and fear, as in the most fundamental interpretation of reality. They have accepted that what is, and what will be, will be. Now, that does not mean a Buddha is inert. In fact, total acceptance of one's position can lead to efforts at meaningful work from that said position. And that can be enjoyable, free from assumptions of success, and above all productive. Think of it as a sort of flow state that can only be achieved once one stops fretting and vibrating with anxiety long enough to appreciate the eternal present. Now, it is my personal belief that Buddhas are not rare. They may be uncommon, but to the level to which they have been venerated, and the pedestal of escaping the life and death cycle which Buddhism bestows upon these minds invites supernatural beliefs. And it is my conviction that no belief in the unprovable is necessary to recognise the function of Buddhahood in a population. To summarise my perspective on Buddhas, I would describe them as individuals that have conquered all of their basal desires and ask only for what is practical and necessary. In essence, a fully mature agent that no longer cries out for their wants as they are fully self-sufficient, and from the stable position of maturity seek to aid others in their learning, emotional growth and maturity, hopefully creating more Buddhas. Now, I'd like to add a note here that highlights disabled people and people who are differently abled. As a schizophrenic, I take antipsychotic medication every day, and if I didn't, I would hear a constant conversation in my head that can hear my thoughts, and it just goes on and on and on, and I become incapable of work, and I start to believe strange things because my mind is constantly having a conversation with puppets that have all these different voices. I can hear my mother and my father, I can hear ex-lovers, I can hear old friends, I can hear old competitors and things, political people. It just goes on, and if I didn't have my medication, I would be incapable of proper work. And so when I say that they only call out for what is practical and necessary, I would include any reasonable adjustments that are necessary for somebody to function, as in their medication or certain conditions that are necessary for somebody to complete their work on a day-to-day level. To give you examples of the kind of people I would consider Buddhas, but that the religion of Buddhism has not. Those who wrote the myth of Jesus, or Jesus himself, those who wrote the myth of Odin, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Rosa Parks, Frida Kahlo, In my opinion, even some YouTubers, such as Abigail Thorne, are highly are definitely up to the standards of positive influence within their communities and are helping people mature. To be a Buddha is not to be perfect or absolutely free from the desire to enjoy oneself, but merely to have honed one's nature into one of selfless productivity and communal nurturing above the most basal and destructive desires that are seeded by greed and fear of the other. I have written in the past of the selfish mirror of Buddhas, which I call the psychotic, which I wish to explore in another video, another time. But put simply, the psychotic does not concur that their desire for power, wealth, and accolades is negative, but do achieve awareness like the Buddha. They are, put simply, the selfishly enlightened. They do not raise those around them, but consume them. They do not ensure that resources are properly distributed, but rather hoard them. They do not stand for the rights of others, but worship privilege instead. What is concerning is what appears to happen when Buddhas gain a large following and they manage to shift the culture towards one of solidarity, respect and generosity. Taking examples such as Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and Jesus Christ himself, it seems to be a fact that once a movement builds enough momentum, Buddhas become noticed by the rich and powerful, who are poised to lose a lot of money, resources and power from the success of such movements. And once these highly influential individuals are identified, efforts are made to neutralise them, either by imprisonment, banishment or death. The most aware tyrants have already made systems of surveillance to identify unwanted actors, routing opposing ideas from the corridors of power. The world is run with a caste-like projection of hierarchised philosophy, with the current accepted philosophy of the ruling class set as a gold standard. This is known by the term hegemony. The hegemonic order becomes ubiquitous and pervades all media and art under the direct control of the hegemony's custodianship. Over time, by controlling all major news sources, by tailoring each news story into a reminder that the current party line is that this is as good as it gets, and the world can only be made worse through any effort to improve the lives of the working class, the downtrodden, and the differently abled. The population begins to lose faith that a better world is possible. The population is preyed upon through their desires. Every entertained sin, as they were referred to in the old church, opens a weakness in the psychology of the individual. The greedy are offered gambling, or sold NFTs, or resort to multi-level marketing schemes, desperate for an undeserved income based off of pure luck, or become exploiters of their own friends and family, when 99% of the time these avenues will only make them even more poor and someone else richer. The lustful and lonely are offered subscriptions to somebody's OnlyFans or watch Twitch streams to develop parasocial relationships that seek to incentivize the donation of money to somebody who already has a large following for a single glance at somebody's moniker and a thanks. They can also become addicted to pornography and become less connected with those around them. The prideful, who wish to be seen as alphas, are not encouraged to truly lead through teaching or counselling, but rather subscribe to men like Andrew Tate. failing to see the irony in alphas following another man into a vision of masculinity that is not actually their own. The vain are goaded into insecurity through unrealistic beauty standards and are offered surgeries as well as skin and hair products to chase youth and beauty. Gluttony is taken advantage of through a lack of proper nutritious food being available in some areas, while overly sugary and fatty foods are widely available and cheaper, particularly in food deserts within the United States. Envy is used to convince those who do not have to take up credit card debt, to experience a life beyond their means for a time, while advertisement constantly presents products to covet. Those who are wrathful are sometimes used to entertain by having them punch each other dim for money. Sometimes, in desperation, the wrathful join street gangs as an outlet, and they can also be conscripted into the army or police to perform precise violence for the ruling class for a living. The current political, economic and philosophical hegemony being constantly reinforced through our media and institutions has led us to a point where an alternative, less predatory society is unimaginable. The population is alienated even from their own discontent. The masses have been primed to believe, through constant suggestion, that times are hard because of something as simple as immigration being too high. Nuance is dead, and there is nothing to look forward to except the forever war of global power projection of the local authority, be that the United States, the European Union, Russia, China, or Iran. With all that being said, I have a few suggestions. In my mind, the most urgent thing that we need to do as a species is to educate our young on their psychological vulnerabilities. This can be achieved through the addition of a mandatory philosophy course till the age of 16. Natural philosophy, as represented by science, already holds a position in British schools up to the age of 16. So it's not unreasonable to demand that students are exposed to a set of moral, ethical, metaphysical, and religious philosophy, designed to equip those young people with the tools they need to protect themselves from the predators that are clearly present within our economy. My second suggestion is that we analyse, codify and grade Buddhahood. This is with the aim to produce spiritual excellence throughout the population, regularly promoting connectivity between neighbours and facilitating community collaboration. This is an extremely difficult suggestion to achieve. However, the international web of Buddhas, who are effectively pillars of a local community, would represent a complete overhaul of global culture. Together, we could strive towards the minimisation of war and the maximisation of human freedom through the application of humanity's fantastic scientific and engineering solutions, which leads me to my final suggestion, that we disregard the illusion of monetary limitations and apply ourselves in a resource-focused economy. It has been observed during war that in wartime, economies can increase production beyond the supposed limits of financial economies. If we put our minds to it, we could have clean drinking water that is properly managed for all. We could have high-speed rail globally, which would undermine the need for the resource and energy-intensive flights. We could have green energy solutions that go far beyond the needs of our species, with nuclear power being used as a stepping stone to reduce the coming climate catastrophe by eliminating greenhouse gases as much as possible, as soon as possible. All of this and more is possible through economic stimulation directly from the government, and all it takes is for the population to demand a collective ownership of our governmental projects. We need to say no to greed. No, you cannot become a billionaire off the back of our good works. No, you cannot reduce the value of our currency by hoarding trillions collectively. And no, you cannot stand in the way of human progress and freedom by demanding opportunities for parasitic financial relationships with our public services. Nothing has ever been made more affordable or possible by the introduction of a capitalist who wants to make $1 billion from that project. Nothing. Nothing has been made cheaper by somebody getting $1 billion selling it. Nothing. Nothing has been made more efficient by the introduction of someone with $1 billion from it. Nothing. Their hoarded wealth is dead money, and they don't even look after the surfaces they do own. In Britain, they poured poo into the rivers 3 times a day every year. And we have to pay a billionaire for our water supply. They took the rivers, they charged us more, and they filled our rivers with poo. As a species, we must take responsibility for our collective belief systems, our education and our services. We must place it in the hands of the wizened masses who have been trodden on by tyrants in the name of greed since time began. The working class are far more wise than the privileged. There is so much value in hearing no. Our first step is to demand free education at all levels for life and a social safety net that maximises freedom for the working class without exploitation. Our way of life can be free and beautiful. We have the technology, we have the power. Never lose hope. If this video has inspired you or frustrated you, please do leave a comment. Any points that need further clarification or defending will be followed up on in another video. If you appreciate the work put into this video, please do drop a like and subscribe to see what else I come up with. And I'll see you soon. I hope you had a great Halloween. You've still got time to put on a scary film. Don't spook yourself too bad before bed. As always, keep it real and have a good one. Cheers.